So just so everybody knows, we're recording these so we can then share them later on. How do I know? Okay, it's just
okay.
stop.
I was wondering the same thing, but change to pause and stop. So
yeah. So, all right. Well, this is Becky Mantle, and I have Sarah Bellotti here with me, who's been helping, make sure that I don't mess up on the new Zoom features and all. So we will go ahead, I think, and get started with our March webinar for becoming baby friendly in Oklahoma. And I did push record, so just so you know, but feel free anytime to, if you want to keep yourself on mute so that we don't hear background noises, but feel free anytime to unmute, and I will ask y'all questions and stuff as well. That's the tricky thing with doing webinars. Sometimes it's the no body contact, no eye contact. So knowing definitely. Stop me anytime. And we don't have the ability to turn off the little doorbell thing, so I have to just click each time somebody's joining us. But anyway, so we will go ahead and move along, I think. There we go. So I have no disclosures to make other than, of course, sharing cute pictures of my first grandchild, I should say. This is baby Alan, who is actually going to be 8 months old tomorrow. Hard to believe. Fully breastfed, and mom and dad both working full time. So we're doing the working parents and daycare and all of that. Anyway, and I realize I don't have in here, but our Becoming Baby Friendly in Oklahoma project is funded with a contract through a contract from the Oklahoma State Department of Health as part of their maternal child health Title V federal funding. And this is also part of their Preparing for a Lifetime initiative to reduce infant mortality in the state of Oklahoma. And one of the key aspects of that initiative, of course, is improving our breastfeeding outcomes. So let me move on here. This is our Oklahoma Breastfeeding Resource Center team, who oversees our hotline and manages our outpatient lactation services. Sarah Bellotti, who's sitting here right next to me and is our go-to person and keeps us all on track. And Amanda Parsons is the newest member who works part-time in our outpatient clinic. So I realize we should have our hotline team. We'll have to do a slide with pictures of our hotline lactation consultants for a future one. Anyway, okay. Just a few other announcements. Just a reminder, if you want to see any of our past webinars, you can go click on the link here, and we will make these slides available after the webinar today. You'll get a link from Sarah with the recording and the PowerPoint slides as well. But go to the OBRC website under Becoming Baby Friendly in Oklahoma, and it's under the Resources tab. And I have a slide at the end of the webinar today, if time permits, that I can kind of show you that real quick. But all of our webinars, past webinars, are recorded and available there. And we also are celebrating National Nutrition Month. I know we have Nancy on. The State Health Department has a whole nice page with tons of resources. Maybe, let's see, I'll pull that so you can see what's on there real quick. Nancy, do you want to unmute yourself and say anything about any other things we need to know about National Nutrition Month?
Well, it's a month that's been observed for, I think, since 2008, I think. Mm-hmm. No, wait, longer than that. Sorry. Don't have that. Caught me off guard. But anyway, we encourage good nutrition for moms and babies and children and families, and lots of resources, and encourage folks to be aware of good nutrition always. And today is actually National Registered Dietitian Nutritionist Day.
Oh, how did we not know that?
Well, I didn't know it till today, so I didn't realize it. We've been busy.
Yeah, March has been a whirlwind for us too. We kind of missed the IBCLC day as well. So, all right, next year we'll have to.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. This is the problem here. Let me get back here. Okay. There we go. Okay, so we'll move on. Just a couple of more announcements, just so we keep everybody updated on activities with our COBA, Coalition of Oklahoma Breastfeeding Advocates. COBA has kind of set the schedule for this year, and they just had a baby cafe grand opening. It's kind of their event of the year, and that was last month. So the next quarterly general meeting will be May 23rd from 11 to 1. We haven't identified locations yet, but we're trying something new this year, and that will be simultaneously hosting the meeting in both Oklahoma City and Tulsa, and using this Zoom program as well, so we can get the two groups together, but to make it a little easier for people to network more locally and not everyone have to drive to one part of the state or the other. And also just to remind everybody to check out COBA's events calendar on the website. I'm going to see if I can click on that real quick. And right, Sarah, I got to move this. I can't ever get to that. And so if you just scroll down on the home page, down here is the COBA events calendar. So, for example, going on right now is the lactation cram course that the WIC service has been hosting. And I know they had a full house for that. And anyway, if you have some kind of breastfeeding related event, or just to get updates about COBA activities by email, you can email info@okbreastfeeding.org to be added to our email list. So let me get myself figuring out how to arrange the screen. Oh well, okay. So we are going to look at the evidence behind baby-friendly steps 7 and 8, which are, many of you are going to be familiar with that, rooming in and breastfeeding on demand. And, whoops, okay. Kind of showing you up front, here are the references that I've cited for this, or utilized for this presentation today, so that you can refer to those later on. So as we continue this series that we've been doing throughout this fiscal year, just a few reminders of some kind of key tenets, as Baby Friendly USA says, key points I think that they want to make sure everybody is aware of. And this is actually right at the start of the guidelines and evaluation criteria. So, and that's a picture of it there. But, one is that breastfeeding has been recognized as the optimal method of infant feeding, and it should be promoted as the norm within all maternal and child health care facilities. And then the second bullet here, the most sound and effective procedural approaches to supporting this in the birthing environment that has been documented in the scientific literature. So to be as evidence-based as possible in the care and the practices that we're following, should be followed by the health facility. The healthcare delivery environment should be neither restrictive nor punitive, and it's all about informed healthcare decisions. So we know those of you that have been involved in working on Baby Friendly for some time, know there's definitely conceptions out there, and so Baby Friendly USA just wants to be very clear that this is not about making things harder for the mother, punishing the mother, shaming a mother, whatever. But it is about making sure that the mother and her family can make an informed healthcare decision. Then let's see, we should be sensitive to cultural and social diversity. And I know sometimes that's challenging. And then the mother and her family should be protected within the healthcare setting from a false or misleading product promotion and or advertising, which can undermine those informed choices regarding infant health care practices. Of course, that's where the marketing piece, the World Health Organization Code of Marketing comes into play. So just some reminders, and those of you that have been on some past webinars, I go through this at the start of each one just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So the emphasis or the motivation for doing this series this year was a publication that the World Health Organization put out in 2017. And this was, a review, as I said, a review of the evidence behind the 10 steps to successful breastfeeding. And this publication, the information in it, the target audience in general, policymakers and expert advisors, technical staff of institutions that might be, designing programs for infant and young child feeding, and also for healthcare professionals and universities to help disseminate accurate information about the Baby-Friendly Hospital Initiative, the 10 Steps to Successful Breastfeeding. Where did this come from, and is it still considered, the current 10 steps still considered evidence-based practice and care? Now, the challenge when they put this out is the very next year, they put out some suggested proposed revisions to the Baby-Friendly Hospital Initiative worldwide, and it has the exact same name. And so it's very confusing to know, to make sure that, you're pulling up the right document. So not quite sure who was in charge of that. Somebody should have taken a look at that and been a little more clear on the difference between these two documents. And so we're not talking about changes to the 10 steps right now. We did have a past webinar last year. I think it was in the summer, maybe June or something, that we had Trish McEnroe, who's the executive director for Baby-Friendly USA. She did a webinar for us going through what were the changes that WHO was making to the guidelines, the Baby-Friendly Hospital guidelines, and what is Baby-Friendly USA, doing about that. And so at least last summer, Baby-Friendly USA was evaluating any proposed changes, and they will be looking at. It'll probably be another year or so before they make any formal changes to the Baby-Friendly USA guidelines and evaluation criteria. So still just we're all just in a holding pattern to see, and I don't see anything major changing based on what they had in that. But you can always go back and take a look at that webinar as well. All right, so our topic today is looking at steps 7 and 8. So just pulled straight out of the Baby-Friendly USA guidelines. Step 7, practice rooming in, allow mothers and infants to remain together 24 hours a day. So what are the actual pieces of that? We joke about the 10 steps to successful breastfeeding, and yet some of the steps seem like they have about another 10 bullet points. So actually step 7 and 8 were some of the shorter ones in a way. So it was kind of interesting putting this one together. Anyway, so the official guideline, says the facility should provide rooming in 24 hours a day as your standard practice, regardless of how mom is feeding the baby. So rooming in for all mothers and babies, all healthy mothers and babies. And when a mother requests that her infant be cared for in the nursery, we should explore the reasons for her request, encourage and educate her about, why it's recommended to have her baby stay with her in the room 24 hours a day. If we educate her and we document that, and she still requests that the baby be cared for in the nursery, then, we just make sure that we, document that we've educated her and she has, still requested that. So now the question here is we get into implementing step 7, and because what if the mom requests, well, you talk to her, you do all this, she still requests, and, okay, fine, then do we have even a safe place, to take the baby, for whatever reason that the baby needs to leave the room. But the thing to keep in mind is that should be the outlier. So Baby-Friendly always has, you always have the ability to have exclusions or, situations that just, you really can't comply with that particular piece of the guidelines or that particular step. But when that becomes most of your patients, then we need to step back and look at, are we really actually implementing this piece? So the other kind of final two pieces here, that medical and nursing staff should conduct newborn procedures at mom's bedside whenever possible, and avoid frequent separations for more than an hour in a 24-hour period. So really routine procedures and exams, should be done at the bedside as much as possible. Then if the baby leaves the room for documented medical reasons, then the mother should have access, to be at the baby's bedside and feed her baby at any time. So the other piece that they don't get into right here too, of course, is if baby's leaving the room, for just, maybe it's maternal request. Well, we also need to document the time the baby left the room, the reason, and then the time that the baby came back to the room. So, and maybe it was for a medical reason, doing a circumcision is, of course, a very common one. So that's, documentation of that. Okay, so what did the World Health Organization's review of the evidence say about Step 7? Step 7 and 8 both fall under they had the steps kind of grouped in some different categories, and these were both the clinical, what I call the clinical practice steps, and this falls in their category of immediate support to initiate and establish breastfeeding. And so the question that they had is, should mothers giving birth in hospitals or facilities providing maternity and newborn services and their infants remain together or, quote, practice rooming in compared to not rooming in order to increase rates of exclusive breastfeeding during the stay at the facility? So not necessarily, so the question wasn't necessarily looking at, does it increase exclusive breastfeeding, duration at 6 weeks or 3 months or 6 months, but does it actually increase exclusive breastfeeding during the stay at the facility? And their overall analysis or in review of the evidence, they said the overall quality, that this was a recommended step, and the evidence that they found was of moderate quality. Now, once again, as we've done this series throughout the year, the other challenge, and actually it was quite a controversy when WHO put this review of evidence out there, is that they only considered randomized controlled trials. And so they excluded a huge body of evidence, on all of the 10 steps. So that's been of great debate as to how, obviously randomized controlled trials are great, and yet it is extremely difficult, as many of you are aware, to answer all of the questions related to breastfeeding and lactation through a randomized controlled trial, because we just can't randomize everything. So it was very frustrating to many people that they limited their review of the evidence to something that is actually rather difficult to apply to breastfeeding practices. So anyway, so in light of that, though, they said moderate quality, and basically they cited a Cochrane review from 2016 that was rooming in for the new mother and infant versus separate care. This was a systematic review that looked at all the randomized trials out there, and they only found one that was a true, randomized controlled trial that had 176 mother-infant pairs. So they had randomized to either rooming in or to baby going to the nursery and coming out to the room for scheduled feeds. So they did find that there was a significant increase in exclusive breastfeeding on postpartum day 4, 86% versus 45%. So, almost double the exclusive breastfeeding. And while we're not talking right now about Step 8, a lot of the research that I looked at often kind of evaluated both of those. So I included that here as well. But they did report that the frequency of feeds in the rooming in group was 8.3. So that kind of meets the recommended minimum number of feeds per day, of 8 to 12, 8 or more in 24. But that wasn't something they could actually compare to the other group because all the feeds were scheduled in that group. So there was no way to do a true comparison there. And so all of the babies, interestingly enough, in the scheduled group were scheduled for 7 feeds in 24 hours. And then in this one trial, they did not look at duration of exclusive breastfeeding. So anyway, the conclusion of this Cochrane review was that there was little evidence to either support or refute rooming in, and that further well-designed randomized controlled trials, were needed, as we could say on a lot of things. However, as I go back a slide, WHO still felt that was enough evidence to continue to support Step 7, or the rooming in piece. So let's see, I'm going to pause there and just see if anything in the chat box. Nope. Any questions from anybody so far? I will try to move on here. So now looking at Step 8, or breastfeeding on demand, and this is copied straight out of the guidelines in the gray bar there, actually. Step 8, encourage breastfeeding on demand. Of course, the translation of that, some people don't like the term demand. What do we have, a little Napoleon tyrant here or something? But encourage feeding on cue. And actually, they said regardless of feeding method. So we should actually be encouraging feeding on cue, breastfeeding or formula feeding, and watching, of course, what the baby's cues are, and teaching families about that. So, just a few further definitions, if you will, that healthcare professionals should help all mothers, once again, regardless of their feeding choice. So understand no restrictions on frequency or length, and that newborns usually feed a minimum of 8 times in 24 hours. Recognize cues, so that we should help families know what those feeding cues are, and both to begin a feeding and to end a feeding. And, I know I would say that babies who are formula feeding by bottle, we may not often recognize the cues they're giving us to end those feedings. So we tend to, and that understand that physical contact and nourishment are both important. So, holding the baby, of course, making eye contact and so forth during feedings is important. Okay, so once again, WHO's question as they reviewed the evidence is, should mothers giving birth practice feeding on demand or infant-led breastfeeding compared to not doing that, or feeding by schedule, in order to increase rates of exclusive breastfeeding during the step? And so they said that they continue to recommend this step, even though there was very low quality evidence. And this one was really surprising to me, because they didn't find any randomized controlled trials evaluating feeding on cue. And yet we still said, recommended, and I guess they didn't, there weren't any trials to say not to do it. But to say that there's, very low quality evidence. Well, I don't know if you only look at randomized controlled trials and you found 0. How do you say that that's any evidence? So it was a little interesting there. So let's move on then. That's what I could actually pull out of the WHO publication. But let's look at other evidence that was not cited by WHO, or maybe, has been published since that came out in, it's been about 2 years now. So one I'm going to spend some time on, because this is hot off the press. And those of you that were at our recent Becoming Baby Friendly in Oklahoma Summit, I touched on this briefly in my State of the State at the beginning of the summit. But this was a publication that just came out in February. And yeah, you can't quite see it on my screen. This was in pediatrics, so a big journal to get this published in. And it was addressing racial inequities in breastfeeding in the southern United States. And you can see our friend and colleague Ann Muirwood was the lead author on this. Actually, I know several of these people. And then Lori Feldman-Winter, a pediatrician who's been a speaker at our summit in years past, as has Dr. Muirwood. So it was really fun for me to see a lot of familiar, awesome names that were involved in this study. So let's take a look at this. So their goal, of course, was to address racial inequities. This was what's known as the CHAMPS project. And some of you, I think we have some people on from Integris Baptist. So some Integris Baptists had participated in the NICHQ, Breastfed Beginnings project several years ago. And CHAMPS was kind of like another version of that, but with some federal and Kellogg funding, but assigned that contract or grant was awarded to a different group, not the Nitschke group. Anyway, and so they titled it Communities and Hospitals Advancing Maternity Practices, or CHAMPS. And they enrolled 33 hospitals across 4 states. So they really targeted the Deep South and states that had particularly not only low breastfeeding rates, but also disparities, if they were finding higher disparities amongst the breastfeeding and health outcomes in those states. So certainly we would know that about Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Texas were the 4 states that ended up being selected to be involved in the project. So they actually had a rolling enrollment over the course of a couple of years from 2014 to 2016. And they didn't require the hospitals to pursue baby-friendly designation, but as they provided intense training, education, leadership, and so forth, they ended up having 91% of the hospitals formally pursuing baby-friendly designation through this project. They also partnered with, of course, the individual state health departments, the WIC service in each state. Interestingly enough, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi was a big partner in that state. And then in Louisiana, the Ochsner Health System, because most of the hospitals that participated in Louisiana were in the New Orleans area. So anyway, I thought that was pretty amazing that 91% were formally pursuing baby-friendly hospital designation. The ones who chose not to formally pursue that were required to address at least 3 of the 10 steps. And they could choose which ones those were. So they had specific data that the hospitals were required to collect. This was all reported in the aggregate, not by individual patient, and that was to be reported monthly. And they didn't. Some people said, why didn't you have them report something on each of the 10 steps? Well, they didn't want to make the data collection so burdensome, and I know y'all know all about that. And so what they asked the hospitals to report was breastfeeding initiation, exclusive breastfeeding at discharge, skin-to-skin care, rooming in, and then also, of course, the race and or ethnicity, as they could obtain that from either the medical record or the birth certificate. And interestingly enough, they also talked in there about how many hospitals don't track their rates by race or ethnicity. So that was definitely a lot of eye-opening information, I think, that they, as the hospital staff are starting to really, see what's happening in their own facility. So this was a really large project, as you can imagine, 33 hospitals, almost 40,000 births that occurred during that, or annual births, of the hospitals enrolled. The average or mean number of births per hospital was 1,267. You can see the range there of around 200 to not quite 4,000 births per year. And by 2018, even though some hospitals, it was rolling enrollment, so it's not like they were working on this for, 5 or 6 years, but they, had almost half of the hospitals designated baby-friendly by the end of the funding schedule for the project. So we had, anyway, and you can see I just was giving you, kind of a quick picture of the 4 states. So Louisiana, the hospitals, the 7 hospitals that were enrolled represented about 11,000 births per year. Mississippi had the most hospitals because they think they really focused heavy effort in Mississippi and actually had quite a bit of strong partnerships with not only the health department, but also Blue Cross Blue Shield in Mississippi. So some of you may not be aware or may not have heard me mention before that Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi actually now requires baby-friendly designation to be designated, one of their, gosh, I've forgotten the name of it now. It's going to blank on that, but they have a designation that hospitals actively seek. Like it's blue something, of course, in the name, but that's one of their, most recommended top performing hospitals. And so to achieve that designation in Mississippi as a Blue Cross Blue Shield hospital, you have to also be baby friendly designated. So that's pretty awesome. Anyway, Tennessee, you can see, only had 2 hospitals had the least amount to participating in a little over 4,000 births. And then Texas had 5 hospitals participating with about 7,500 births per year represented. So, so here, just to quickly get to the results, and all of these were statistically significant. They found that over this time period, rooming in increased from 11%. Imagine, I was just astonished when I saw some of these numbers. As much as work as we've done in Oklahoma, and how many of our hospitals have really been, changing their practices and updating policies, to go to a state where 11% of African American couplets roomed in before this project, was really getting going. So anyway, so they were able to increase that to 75%. So now we had, a huge increase. They found that the African American infants who roomed in were 1.5 times more likely to be exclusively breastfed at discharge. They had, of course, a significant increase in breastfeeding initiation from 46 to 63%. Exclusive breastfeeding also increased amongst African American women from 19 to 31%. And then the disparity in breastfeeding rates overall between the African American and white infants decreased by almost 10%. So they narrowed the gap. But anyway, for the purpose of our topic today, with a significant increase in rooming in, they had huge increases in exclusive breastfeeding at discharge. And this was actually true amongst all of the babies, but particularly true amongst the African American, where we have the biggest disparities, of course. So I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to arrange my screen better. So I'm going to try. Oh, can I move it?
No.
Then it's upside down. No, I can't do that. So I'm going to try moving this back down here where it won't cut off my titles.
Oh, that's good.
Let's see. How does that work?
Yeah. They don't see it.
Gosh. It drops down. Maybe it's supposed to be there. Learn something new every day. Anyway, so now here's another study that is not a new one. It's 2005 out of Greece. But they looked at prevalence and determinants of exclusive breastfeeding during the hospital stay. And this was a cross-sectional study of 1,600 healthy women with healthy babies, so babies that could room in. And they found that rooming in was associated with exclusive breastfeeding at discharge with an odds ratio of 3.7. So a baby who roomed in had a 3.7-fold greater chance of exclusive breastfeeding at discharge than a baby who did not room in. So almost a 4-fold difference. And they also looked at feeding on cue, or what they called demand feeding. And they said that demand feeding was associated with exclusive breastfeeding at discharge as well, with an odds ratio of 2.18. So almost twice the rate of exclusive breastfeeding by hospital discharge if that baby was fed on cue. Then a newer study, breastfeeding determinants in healthy term newborns. This was a prospective study out of one hospital, with 640 dyads that they evaluated. And of course, once again, only healthy term newborns. So we're not looking at NICU babies with these two questions, step 7 and 8. And then they found in this study the factors that positively affected breastfeeding were rooming in, breastfeeding on demand. Of course, they had several other things, but rooming in and breastfeeding on demand, had some of the strongest impact on breastfeeding in that study. So this was an interesting one as I, kind of doing some lit search and looking at some of the other publications out there. This was a study that measured salivary cortisol in newborns. And really kind of trying to assess the stress level. So they had 40 newborns who roomed in either, and they were divided either full rooming in for 24 hours or partial rooming in, about half of each day. And then, of course, some bias in this, of course, because they were divided by the mother's choice. If the mother wanted her baby to stay in the room the whole time or did not. But they collected saliva samples on day of life 3 in the morning between 7 and 8 o'clock on those days. And they found a significant difference in the salivary cortisol level. So the control group, so the babies who were partial roomers in, is that a word, had 488 nanograms per deciliter as opposed to 258 in the rooming in group. So their conclusion was that rooming in reduces salivary cortisol and likely newborn stress. And that if we do that, that could have long-term positive effects, reducing the risk of metabolic syndrome, high blood pressure, cognitive and behavioral changes. It's like, wow, that's kind of a lot with only 40 babies that you're going to draw that conclusion. But they were excited about their study, obviously. Anyway, I just thought it was interesting. That was something, looking at a little physiology there in the babies. All right, so I'm going to kind of turn our attention to one of the concerns that comes up as we do more rooming in, and that's, of course, the risk of newborn falls. And this was a newborn safety bundle that was just came out in AWAN's other journal, not Joggin, but I'm, of course, blanking on the name right now, Nursing for Women's Health, I think. Anyway, so this was, I thought, a really good thing to include in this talk because that's often a concern about Step 7. And so this was implemented in a baby-friendly hospital, so they'd achieved baby-friendly designation. So they were, of course, doing routine, rooming in and so forth. And they had about 2,000 births per year. And the bundle included identifying and assessing maternal risk factors, mode of delivery, medication, and so forth, parental safety agreement, possible safety interventions, and then reporting and debriefing. And I'll go into a little bit more here in a second. But what they found in this QI project was that prior to implementing this safety bundle, they had identified that 14% of their babies were in a risk to fall situation, and that they'd had, over the past 2 years, they'd had 3 falls. And after the bundle implementation, they saw a significant decrease in risk to fall situations, and they had 0 infant falls in 2 years. So they really had saw some positive changes there. So just so you know, some tools that are out there. This was the risk to fall assessment form, really, that they wanted the nursing staff to utilize and report these situations. If they walked into the room and the baby was in the arms of somebody who was sleeping, and who was it or where was it, and was anybody else in the room, and so forth, so that they could get some data on what's happening and what do they need to do, what interventions can they help with. And so then they had quarterly data collection, and this was the risk to fall reports that staff were turning in. And so as you can see, at the start of their project, they had their baseline, they started at about 40% of their babies, so and that actual number was 23. And then, as they were implementing the project over the course of, a little over a year, then they saw those numbers drop, so at least down to single digits. So this isn't falls, this is babies that were found in unsafe situations. So, and so I'm just took this, so straight out of the publication, the suggested implications here, implementing a safety bundle may decrease risk of adverse, of course, accidental outcomes, that nurses should conduct more frequent bedside rounds, at least every 1 to 2 hours. I know many of you are probably doing, hourly rounding already. And patients' room doors shouldn't be latched shut, so the nurse can kind of, quietly step in and check on things and not necessarily, wake everybody up. That we should make sure mothers are educated to call the nurse if she needs help at any time of the day or night, and certainly, during feedings. And that helping the staff maybe with doing some role playing or face-to-face counseling, so that we can impart this information in a caring way, and so that parents can learn safety practices while they're in the hospital that they're going to continue at home as well. So, because we're certainly not monitoring newborn falls at home. Anyway, so I thought it would be helpful to include something like that, because as we do more rooming in, of course, we can have safety situations that need to be addressed. So now the final piece of this presentation is just, how do we overcome some of the barriers? And so once again, I cited, because I think a lot of these really still apply, from this publication called Overcoming Barriers to Implementing the 10 Steps, that, some of the barriers they identified: perception of staff and our mothers that sleep quality is better if the baby goes to the nursery, and if the baby stays in the room, nobody's going to get any sleep. And a perception that, we have to take the baby out of the room so that we can bathe the baby, do the exam, other medical procedures, and so forth. So those were definitely some common barriers. Some of the strategies they suggested, of course, up to date on the evidence regarding sleep and mother-baby contact. Plenty of evidence to support, keeping baby in the room doesn't reduce, the actual sleep of the mother. What are those routine procedures that can be done in the room? And, what do we need to do? Do we have the right equipment? Is this a logistical thing? Do we have a scale we can take to the room, or whatever it is that, the barrier might be? And of course, do those role plays for staff so that they know how to respond respectfully when moms do request for the baby to go to the nursery. So I'm going to pause here, and I know we've got a number of people on today. So if someone wants to share maybe something what's worked for your hospital in overcoming some of these barriers to step 7. So if somebody wants to unmute themselves, and let's see, we've got Asheville. Let's see who we have on today. All's quiet out there in Cyberland.
Hey, Becky, this is Charlie. We are doing great with skin to skin. My only issue is the rooming in part. I can't get my nurses to do the 24-hour testing in the rooms. So I'm fixing to put a big push on that.
Okay.
A lot of them don't want the screaming babies in front of the moms. They get nervous doing the PKUs and things like that. So I've suggested that they go behind the curtain if they want to do it, so the baby doesn't leave the room, or do it while the baby's on the breast. But anyway, if anybody's got suggestions or some things that worked for them.
Well, I know we've got some people on at other hospitals that are baby friendly. So if somebody that's kind of worked through this issue, I want to respond to Charlie. And I know this is something when I was still working at OU Medical Center, that came to light in doing some of the little skills training with the staff, and finally having a nurse admit to me, it's like a musician with performance anxiety. I don't want to try to draw blood or stick the baby, do the PKU in front of the mother, because what if I can't get enough blood? What if I have to squeeze the baby's heel, or the mother's going to think I'm hurting the baby too much or something. So they were nervous about just having to have somebody watch them. So even just maybe knowing that that's an issue and how to address that, help them overcome that, what I call performance anxiety. So, but anyone else that's on today that I know has worked through that.
Becky, it's Karen.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't say that I'm on because I'm sitting next to Charlie at Shawnee.
Okay.
But I told her, I'm going to respond to you right next to you.
That works. That works.
It does. So one of the things that we did, we had the same issue with most of the nurses. Same complaints, same reasons that they didn't want to do it in a room. And the way we solved it, we made up a cart with everything on it that they would need to draw the 24-hour labs, to do the heart screen, to weigh the baby, to do just about everything on one cart. And then we picked 2 nurses, a night shift and a day shift. That one of them was Amy Cleveland, that used to come to things with me quite a bit, and a nurse. And we picked 2 nurses that we knew were like the breastfeeding, champions. And we ran it past them and said, could you be like the role model of this? Would you take this on and just you take this down and do all your stuff? And then I want you to talk about it. What went well, what didn't go well, what would we change? That's exactly what we did. We had literally two nurses out of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Jamila at night and Amy during the day. And so then they would come back and they would start kind of talking about it at the desk. Like, oh my gosh, you guys, this was so much easier. I mean, I got everything done. I could kind of explain everything to the parents while I'm standing there doing it. They could help hold the baby while I was doing it. And they kind of bragged on it. There was some things like, but we really need blah, blah, blah on the cart. So they fixed it in front of the staff where the staff could see there was a challenge. I recognized it. I fixed it. Now it's working much better. And it just was like a little ripple effect. We didn't even step back in again. We just said, Jamila at night, Amy at the daytime. You're going to do all of yours. And within a few months, it was just like a little ripple, and it just changed everybody over. Pretty soon, someone else like, okay, I'm going to try it. I'm just going to try it this one time. And pretty soon they're like, you're right. It wasn't so bad. And I kind of liked it. And like everything's right there. And then I don't have to go back to the room and then explain everything I did. I can just do it as I'm doing my stuff. Right. And then it just became like, this is the way you do it. And now any new person that comes in, we got certified in fall of 2016. And so, since that time, anybody new that gets hired, that's just how, when they're out there with their preceptor, that's just what they tell them we do. So the new girls don't know any different. And really we did. We just started with 2 people. And that's how it made the change. Now we still have, if a baby needs an IV, if a baby needs circumcision, of course, or if a baby needs cultures done, that's a little more invasive.
Right.
And blood cultures, they will still take the baby back for those 3 things.
And those are
everything else
routine procedures.
Everything else is done in the room.
Right. And the key there too is that those are not what you would consider routine procedures.
Right, exactly.
So so that's the difference there too.
I think another big thing that kind of goes along with it too that helped was we really started pushing the doctors, the pediatricians, to do their exams in the room, because we used to have the baby train, or they'd line them all up, and the pediatrician would sit down with all the charts in the nursery and just go down the line and see all the babies. And then, and so we talked to them about it when Baby Friendly, when we first started. And again, we had to kind of start with one. I mean, we had several, and we had to start with one and just say, can you please there's not good lighting in the room. There is good lighting. You just don't know there's a delivery light in there that you just never turn on. So we can turn that on and it's bright as it can be. Right. Okay, well, I don't have, we would just take whatever they needed, and pretty soon they were doing it. And I think then when the nurses saw, we're not even bringing babies in here anymore for the doctors, then they sort of felt a little
Pressure as well.
like we can do all of these things. If they can do their thing in there, I guess we can too. But anyway, that's kind of what we did. We just picked 2 people and recruited them to do it. And it just rippled through. And we did lots of encouragement, lots of, if someone would come and tell me, oh my gosh, Karen, I used that cart for the first time. It really wasn't too bad. It really worked. I put a big note up on the board in the break room, Yahoo for so-and-so. She's done the procedures. And I mean, I made a big positive out of everybody that's kind of switched over.
Yeah, celebrated all those little baby steps. So,
and I said, I know this is hard. This is completely changing your workflow, but once you do it, I think you'll find that, we change our workflow a lot for this. I mean, we used to take every baby over to the warmer and check them out. Well, now you've already figured out how to do skin to skin. That was a big change. Well, this is another change, but you'll live through it, and you'll probably actually like it better when you've done it a few times.
Right.
And that's really been the case. Now I never see, I mean, there's hardly ever anybody in our nursery, really.
Good deal. Well, I'm going to move on and look at barriers to step 8. Some of the common barriers that were cited in this publication. Of course, expectations on the part of both mothers and staff that feeding should occur on a regular, predictable schedule, and that comes, of course, from our history of bottle feeding and being able to schedule those feeds like that when our breastfeeding rates were so horribly low there for many, many years. And then just not knowing what feeding cues look like. And of course, not enough mother-baby contacts. Kind of hard to feed on cue if the baby's not in the room with you. So these 2 steps really kind of go hand in hand. And so some of the barriers are the strategies that they use to overcome those barriers. Of course, educate the mothers both during the prenatal period and the early postpartum period on what feeding cues look like. Make sure staff know what feeding cues look like. Once again, do those role play opportunities so they can answer those questions from the parents on, how often should I feed my baby? And then, of course, continue to encourage a lot of skin-to-skin contact so that we, get those, I always talk about, get those sleepy babies skin-to-skin. So we'll definitely prompt more feeding cues. So once again, pause and ask the group here, what has worked for your hospital as far as addressing step 8? If anybody wants to. Quiet out there again. I know one thing I've seen happen too is when we teach parents about feeding on cue, and we still kind of include the schedule in there too. We're just afraid to let go of that schedule, and some of that, with good intentions, of course, because we all want to make sure the baby's getting fed appropriately. So trying to reframe that so that we're not saying, feed anytime the baby looks hungry, and that should be every 2 to 3 hours because we just gave a schedule, but going and just giving them the scripting. That should be 8 times in 24 hours. And certainly by the time you go home, babies should be cueing or waking to feed at least 8 to 12 times in 24 hours. So has anyone had any other kinds of barriers to step 8 that they found particularly challenging? Or has this been an easier step? I think families also get a lot of mixed messages on this, so we don't know where they got their information from either. And sometimes blame our own staff when it was like, well, they got it from, friends or family members or something.
Becky?
Yeah.
This is Vicki.
Yeah.
It was for our staff mainly just getting the language down. So we put some flyers in each admission folder and just had them everywhere, the 8 to 12 times at 24.
Mm-hmm.
just repeatedly seeing that, I finally got it. But it is a habit to break.
Yes, it's a habit to break. Yeah, definitely a hard habit to break. So, and I've included on these slides as well, just these are some of the flyers or handouts, that we have available on our website as well, that are certainly available for free download. This is a real popular one, the baby feeding cues, and this actually came out of Queensland, Australia, and we contacted and got permission to utilize it, and put our information in. It's got the 10 steps on the back, and we put the breastfeeding hotline number down there on the bottom of that as well. So I'm going to move on. We are almost out of time here, but just to remind everybody that we do have, thanks to a lot of hard work by Sarah and also Petra, that our new website is up and live, and this is what it looks like, and it's our new website link. So you might change that on your, if you happen to have us saved in your favorites, but it's obrc.ouhsc.edu, and I'm going to click here just real quick to show you, hopefully. Let's get this up here. And Sarah said under baby friendly, you can go to find previous webinar. I thought it was down here too.
That's a link to be on our
and see every webinar.
Schedule. Yeah.
Oh, to be on the schedule. Okay. Now Sarah's showing me around. She's been on the website a lot more than me. Oh yeah, all BBFOK webinars, all patient handouts. So you can go right here if you wanted to check out any, and these are all free for anybody to make use of, and try to have some, we may have in English and Spanish. So anyway, and I think I had just a couple of last slides with just some quick reminders that other upcoming educational opportunities. I have a 2-day, we quarterly do a 2-day training, Breastfeeding Basics and Beyond, kind of in conjunction with a section of the State Health Department that trains all the home visiting staff, but this is open for anyone to attend. So there will be a Tulsa training in June, and then the Making Breastfeeding Easier class we do quarterly here on the Health Science Center campus, but of course any hospital can request that, as Karen just did recently, so that we can get that scheduled at your location, as you may have new staff that need additional training. And then of course our 15-hour online breastfeeding training for healthcare staff that helps meet the didactic requirements for staff training is available on our website as well. And last but not least, just remember, those of you that did attend the summit last month, to remember to complete the online evaluation. Sarah, they have until
March 31st.
Okay, they have until March 31st, and then that link will close. But if once they complete the evaluation, then they'll get their certificate of attendance. So, and certainly let us know if we had a couple of people, say that they didn't get their certificate. So definitely let us know if anybody has any trouble with that. And I think, last but not least, just future webinars. In April, we will actually be doing one of our newsletters, and electronic newsletters, so be on the lookout for that. In May, Petra and Sarah will walk us through, we're moving our online training to a new portal that we hope will be a lot more user-friendly and actually give us a lot more capabilities. So they will plan to walk us through that. And then last but not least, the final in this series of the evidence behind baby-friendly steps 9 and 10. So that will wrap that up. So I will call this a wrap, and I'm just going to stop and see if there's any other questions from anyone. Did somebody, maybe that was somebody leaving. So before we close, anybody have any other announcements or questions or anything? Other than everybody getting back to work too, and maybe spring break plans coming up. So anyway, well, thanks to everybody for joining in today. And once again, Sarah will have a recording as soon as that's ready, and that link will go out by email to everybody, so along with a copy of the slides. So thanks for joining in, and enjoy the rest of your day today. Thanks a bunch. see, how do I stop end meeting, or do I?